Today, we're going to talk a bit about what we do as a project and why we do it. So again, we're IYEC for short. We're volunteers at UCLA, and we work to dismantle the school-to-prison pipeline, and we also address issues that come along with the prison industrial complex. So a bit about who we are. We were started in 1988 by the Muslim Student Association, and we volunteer every week at Camp Red Miller in Malibu. So it's a probation camp. It's not like a penitentiary. It's kids are on probation, and they're young men, ages 13 to 18. And we're a sub-project of the Community Programs Office, which is this really cool organization on campus that has a lot of different projects for retention of students on campus to help them once they get here to stay here, outreach programs to help students get here, and also volunteer projects like us who go out into the community and do volunteer work to help the community get to UCLA and see what UCLA is about. There's a lot of health and education and social justice. And we're kind of a mix between social justice and education. So just a little plug about why you should volunteer when you get to college. Because you guys are all high school, right? All high schools? No? None of you are high school? Oh, okay.
There's some.
Okay, so it's a mixture. I wasn't really sure about the demographics. So we have community college, high school, right? So the two. Okay, cool. So in any case, you should volunteer when you get to the college of your choice or at the college you're at now, anything like that. So obviously you're fostering community within our UCLA campus. We're fostering community, but also when you go out into the community, you're creating a good reputation for your own school, and you're showing that your school doesn't just care about like academics and research, but also about improving the community within which we exist. So service is obviously an important part of what we do, and we do that because it's a morally right thing to do, and because we want to improve the world around us. And of course, this is how we make a lot of friends. So here's just some pictures of us during our time together as friends. So we had like a nice social, and we had dinners together. And this is actually the front page of the Daily Bruin, which is our campus newspaper. And this is when we held a vigil in honor of Michael Brown last summer, 2 summers ago. So another important part of our project is to sort of help the community heal from these racial aggressions, and so we spend a lot of time organizing these kinds of events as well as helping the community. So to set this all up, we can talk about race as it's being portrayed today. So it's a bit different now than it was when I was in high school, I think. We've sort of seen this paradigm shift in thinking that racism no longer exists, to acknowledging racism as sort of an institutionalized creation now. So here are some clippings. This is from Ferguson post the Department of Justice investigation, where suddenly we realized that perhaps all these protests and all these concerns were actually valid. So there were things that came out about emails, and there were things that came out about the city actually encouraging police officers to give tickets to people to raise revenue for the city. So they were actually telling them to give tickets in order to raise money, like it was part of their budget as a city to give tickets to people. And then if you consider who that affects most strongly, we can look at the demographics of Ferguson. So 67% of the residents of Ferguson are African Americans, but 93% of those arrests made between 2012 and 2014 consist of African American individuals. And interestingly, I thought that this was a really sort of interesting example of how the police system there was working, is that every time a person was arrested because they were, quote, resisting arrest, or like causing issues, basically. I mean, you can imagine the mentality of what it means to resist arrest. That person was Black. So, and then additionally, those jail time that they were serving for not paying fines and things like that was not going on their records. They weren't getting any credit for it. And they were being forced to go to jail for not paying a speeding ticket, for example, or parking tickets. They were sending them to jail for small infractions. So now we can talk about prison in the United States. We've addressed that race is obviously an important issue. So let's talk a bit about implicit bias and how implicit bias plays into prisons and how we treat race today. So the first thing, these are a few studies, and there's sources on the bottom, and I actually got this from a big review, and if you're interested in reading that review, I can give you that after this. So this is asking people to look at an image. So either, right, this is like a wrench or something. I don't know what they're called, but they're like wrenches. And the other one's obviously a gun. And so what they did is they would show someone a face. These are examples of the faces used in the study. And they would ask them to identify something as either a weapon or a tool. And so obviously guns are pretty obviously weapons. So when they saw guns, like, okay, this is a gun. But when shown the face of an African American, they were more likely to misidentify a tool as a weapon. So that's like the first case we see here of implicit bias, right? For no reason, they're looking at a wrench and they're saying this is a tool, not a weapon. We also have response bias, which is sort of like a virtual reality experiment they did where they would put you in a room situation where you have to defeat the bad guys, but you don't know if they're bad guys or good guys that you need to help. So they would show people pictures like this, like these are the kind of situations, and then they would ask them to respond. And people were more likely to shoot a black person more quickly than they were a white person. And that pattern was less obvious and less seen amongst the police force, but they were more likely to shoot. So the police would actually take longer to shoot, but they were more likely to shoot an African American than a white Caucasian passing person. And then we get to media bias, which is the last kind of bias we're going to talk about. And there's sort of this push within the media that there's a lot of black on white crime and there's a lot of black male on white female crime. And this is, again, something that was talked about in the review. But actually, if you look at crime statistics, most crime is intraracial, so it's between people of the same race. And I didn't include the figure here, but most crime is actually between people of the same gender as well. So you have this very small amount of interracial crime, and of that, an even smaller amount of it is between people of different genders. So what the media is actually showing is much less than what we're seeing. And since we're talking today about the school-to-prison pipeline, I wanted to talk about race as it applies to the LAUSD. So you guys are all from LA though, right? Like that's really Southern California? Okay. So these are actual statistics that I took from the LAUSD website, and I sort of just graphed them so we could see visually what's going on here. So make sure to pay attention that there's different amounts of each race, but consider the areas of all these plots and look at the number of people that graduate and go to college, which is yellow. I don't know if you can read that. So this is people that graduated and went to college, people that graduated high school but didn't go to college, and then people that did not graduate high school. So amongst whites, which is in the far left corner there, we see way less people are not graduating high school. So a ton of people are graduating high school. In fact, most of them are going to college. Some of them are not. But then if you look at the proportions for Latino and Latina and Black individuals, you have much less people graduating, like significantly less people graduating high school. And of those people, much less of them are continuing to go on to college. So it's hard to get a degree when the statistics in your district are against you. So why is that? Why are we not seeing more people getting pushed out of high school and into college? Why are we seeing them getting pushed into prisons? So let's look at spending in California. So this is the percent increase over 20 years in spending on schools and prisons. So there was a 27% increase in school spending, and there was a 127% increase in prison spending. So obviously we have to account for inflation, right? It makes sense to pay more for things over time. But why are we paying so significantly more for prisons than we are for schools? If we put that money in schools, perhaps we could stop putting people in prison. And then I just have some cool graphics that I found on the internet. This is the amount of, again, the amount of money that we spend per inmate per year versus per student per year. And the yellow is so it's per state, and we have every yellow dot is the amount of money that we spend per student, and every blue dot is the amount of money that we spend per inmate. So here's almost $60,000 for an inmate versus $20,000 for a student. And like I said, it's important to acknowledge that when you have people that you're paying to live, right? When someone's incarcerated, you're in charge of their healthcare, you're in charge of their food and all those things, but significantly more money than it should be. And we could put some of the, if we transferred that money, we got people out of prisons and into schools, and we could spend that money on schools to educate these people so that they don't have to get pushed into this prison system. And then this is another graphics, courtesy of Mike.com, his new favorite news outlet. So it's like a GIF video. So you can see the change. We'll keep going. No. Okay, so this first number here is school spending again. And then you can see the massive increase. You do it? Yeah. Right? It's a bit shocking when you consider like the gap between money spent between these two things. So Now we've talked to you about a bit of race, and I know that a lot of people probably know more about the school division pipeline than I do, but we've told you about race, we've told you that it actually matters, that race is still an issue in the United States. So how is that affecting our schools, and what is the school division pipeline? So you can read this for yourself, but I'll read it out loud. The school division pipeline refers to the policies and practices that put our nation's school children, especially our most at-risk children, out of classrooms and into the juvenile and criminal justice system, courtesy of the ACLU website. So instead of helping students who may be acting out in high schools or students who are having issues, we're referring them actually to a different system to handle those issues. So instead of dealing with disciplinary actions in school, as it used to be, like referring kids to principals, principals are referring kids to school officers, and then they're going to the court system. So how are we doing this? We're suspending them. So between the years of 1974 and 2000, there was a massive increase in the amount of students that are suspended. So 1974, I think it was like 1.8 million suspensions in the United States. And now we're above 3 million in 2000. And in that period, the question is, why did that happen? Does anyone have an idea of why our suspension rates skyrocketed in that time period? Like what may have happened, like policy changes? Yeah. Kind of. That's a bit related, yeah. Yeah, zero tolerance policies, exactly. So what happens is schools stopped basically helping kids out, right? Kids make mistakes and schools say, we'll forgive you this time, don't do it again. Instead, they said, if you make one mistake, you're done, you're out, you're suspended. And then if you make another mistake after that, you're done, you can't come back to the school. So who are these zero tolerance policies actually affecting? 40% of students expelled from US schools are Black. Black students are 3.5 times more likely to be suspended than white students, and Black and Latina students are twice as likely to not graduate high school as whites, which we saw earlier in those graphs. And 68% of all males in state or federal prison do not have a high school diploma. And we can give a small aside, Mom can speak to as well, probably, that when we tutor young men in these camps, probation camps, almost none of them have taken the KC, right? You all have to take the KC to graduate high school. Almost none of them can take it. None of them have enough credits. So if they even took it, they wouldn't be able to graduate high school because they don't have enough credits. And they're not prepared. And so we just try to work with them to prepare them for that.
We tutor them for the GED, which is usually their only option if they want to achieve a high school diploma equivalent, because all the other options have been exhausted, right? So they can't finish up high school and get them enough credits to stay on track. So GED is almost the only alternative that's left for most of the students if they want to pursue a high school diploma equivalent.
So we can get from the slide that we know that a lot of kids are affected by suspensions, and then who's getting suspended is obviously race-based. So what about foster care? It's kind of similar. A lot of foster care individuals end up in prison. So the most, let's see if we combine these two facts. So 50% of students in the foster care system are Black or Latino and Latina. And 75% of the inmates in California are former foster care youth. So combine these statistics and sort of realize that there's definitely a pipeline between foster care and prisons as well. So why are we having these issues in schools? What's the difference between now and 1974 when we had vastly fewer suspensions and incarceration of individuals? Schools obviously don't have resources. A lot of you probably know, since you went to high school, that class sizes are gigantic now. And in addition, a lot of the teachers, though, this is Pennsylvania, obviously not LUSD, but a lot of the teachers that we do have in these public school systems are not even accredited. So they're not properly trained, and they're not given the money that they need to put on great programs. So a lot of us maybe had great science educations in high school, we got to experiments, but a lot of people come to university and they've never run a single experiment in chemistry class, right? They've never lit salt on fire, whatever those cool things you do in high school are. So teachers are expected to spend their own money on those things. But who are we paying the least amount of money? Teachers. So who can't afford to supplement their students' educations? Teachers.
And also, it's not only that they don't even have enough money, sometimes funds are also misdirected. I know there was a campaign that happened in LAUSD where there was funds that were allocated toward buying iPads or laptops for the schools when they didn't even have proper heating systems, when they didn't have proper basic necessities or facilities inside the school to have them operate at the proper capacity. So even if there is money being allocated to these schools, they're not being put toward educational purposes, but rather toward, at costs that, might not be necessary for the students.
And I feel like they actually ended up returning those because they had no infrastructure for their iPads either, so they had nothing to do with them. They just bought them.
Yeah,
no
which is
plan
money
for
that was
using
put,
iPads.
yeah.
All right, so back to the zero tolerance policy here. Can someone define the zero tolerance policy? We talked about it a bit, but let's get some like engagement.
If anyone has even exposure or previous
Yeah.
experience with it, that they might want to share.
I know a lot of people got expelled because of zero tolerance policy. That were a lot of good people, like good souls, you know what I mean? They got expelled from the district, so they wouldn't even go to the district is worse than just the school because you have to go
To another school.
the whole different school district to go to school, which is unlikely to go.
Exactly, and once you're expelled from a district, it's so much more of an effort to actually go to school again, right? You'd have to like almost move cities or the equivalent to that. I mean, there's even different, we don't have any accounts written here, but like there's a lot of, I don't know if you do. Yeah, here we have some accounts of people who have been expelled or suspended for different things. I mean, I think the worst one that I heard was a student was told, or the class field trip was happening, and I think they were like 6th graders or 7th graders, and they were told not to jump in a puddle. And one of the students jumped in a puddle, and he was, sent to get expelled or suspended for jumping in a puddle because he wasn't listening.
I was actually expelled from my high school as well. I was part of the zero tolerance policy on my campus in middle school, and they taught me. I had along with a lot of my friends, they all called us inside the office and they interviewed us and stuff like that. They searched us, and basically they found some stuff on me, specifically marijuana and paraphernalia. And that same day I was expelled, But I was still not expelled from the district, but expelled from middle school. So I couldn't go to any traditional middle school. I was actually forced to go to, we call it community-based school, which was an alternative form of education, more alternative than continuation. It was simply completely different. And we were isolated in classes would be made up of 10 students and one instructor all day. Somewhat similar to elementary system that. And one thing I can most definitely say that continuation, although I was surrounded by a bunch of students that came out of prison and that were in the same situation as me, the instructor was a great instructor, but it had a lot of faults in that system. And currently, I just found out last week that they closed down community-based school. Like the school that I was going to when I got expelled, that it's going to really down there. That's just a little.
So then now there's not even an alternative, right?
Yeah, now suspension rates have dropped a little bit in our district because of someone working inside of the district that came back to the district and they expelled me. I still got with them, but that's cool. But yeah, they closed down community school and they're working towards it. So I'm a five.
Yeah, so I think that what you're talking about are these disciplinary schools where we send people once they get suspended or expelled. And a lot of these places, so we're going to talk about the privatization of prisons and how that's an issue, but a lot of these schools are privatized and not regulated. So we probably don't need to tell you what the issues are when you create a private institution that's in charge of educating kids, but we're not regulating it to make sure they're getting the same education as kids in public schools, which are obviously highly regulated, not necessarily still getting a good education, but at least an education. So like we said earlier, we're pushing kids out of our in-school disciplinary system and sending them to the courts. But courts aren't set up to deal with kids who are found having paraphernalia on their person or who are acting out or bringing a pocket knife to school. That's not what the courts are made for. And I think this is really, I thought it was shocking when I was going through this, that 80% of students that go through the court system are not represented by an attorney or any legal service. So kids are getting pushed through the system and they actually have
no representation.
Yeah, and no representation, and I feel like really you're stripped of your rights if you don't have representation, because no one knows enough about their rights as a regular layperson to know.
Especially as a younger student.
Especially as a middle school or a high school, like no one knows anything. So obviously it's a big issue that we're not representing these kids properly, not giving them resources to get them through these issues. And if we are going to use this as a form of jurisdiction in schools, then obviously we need to build that up and give them resources to understand how they can fix whatever issue brought them there. So I should have pointed this out, but on the top I had these nice little dots and they were like lighting up as we went through the prison pipeline. Did anyone notice it? Okay. So now we're at the end of the pipeline here. And what's the end of the pipeline? It's recidivism. Someone define recidivism for me. You don't use these words, like use your own words. Like what is recidivism in schools? Yeah.
When you, well, basically when you kind of do something, do behavior again, you repeat, like a repeat offender kind of.
Yeah, exactly. So a few slides back, I had some things about like smoking and whatever things that can like end up getting people suspended. So those are also huge contributors to recidivism. So if you're on probation and you get caught doing any of those things, that's a violation of your probation, and you can end up back in the probation camp or whatever facility that you're sent to. So recidivism is an issue not just with schools. It's obviously an issue with schools because kids go into, so the pattern for our students, from what I've understood from them, is that they start in school, they get suspended, and then or expelled, and they get put on probation, and then they get sent to the probation camp where they are for 3, 6, or 9 months, usually at least 6. I've never
Most of the students we work with are about there for 9 months.
Yeah. And then in that time, they're supposed to be prepared for the KC and the GED, but they're not. And then they get sent back out. And we have first experience. I've seen actually 2 weeks ago, we had a student that was gone for a week, and then we came back and he was back again.
So he's been out of probation and came back to camp.
Like, I mean, I just can't even articulate how real recidivism is, because that's not the first student that I've actually had to leave, and then we see them back a few months later maybe, and why are you back here again? So what about recidivism in prisons? So we have a lot of people that get out of prison and then they again violate their conditions of parole, probation, and then they come back. So another figure for you. I actually really enjoyed getting all these figures together in your presentations. It felt kind of good. So this is from 1994 because recidivism takes time, so a lot of the facts are outdated. But you can see how many released prisoners were rearrested within 3 years in 1994. It's pretty, so I think the number was 60, it doesn't look like 67, but it was like 67 and 93%. And so this, I mean, this is just a visualization for how real recidivism is, how big of an issue. And it's also important to point out that a lot of these people are in prison and going back to prison for drug offenses and like public order, not for violent offenses. So they're not actually committing crime against another body, they're maybe in possession of drugs or something like that. Which, that brings us to the prison industrial complex, which explains why we're in this case where we are putting so many people in prisons and how we got there. And
so how many of you have heard of the prison industrial complex? Okay, so I mean, in an ideal world, you have, or a more just world, you imagine that, you know, prison is somewhat colorblind, you spend your time there, and, you know, you get out, and hopefully once you get out, you have an opportunity to make amends and, you know, start over, right? But with the prison industrial complex, that's not necessarily the case. So the prison industrial complex is basically laws, institutions, and systems that are working to keep the community that's in prison beyond the amount of time that they might or should be in prison. So it also involves like the privatization of prisons, and whereas at one point in time they were more of like a public institution, now they've become privatized and commercialized. So now prisons have become a business that people can buy stocks in, that people can invest in, and that people hope, you have people who are paying money to keep prisons running and going. So obviously when you have a huge, large, usually wealthy community who's invested in keeping prisons running and going, you'd imagine that there are a lot more things that are put in motion to keep the people who are in prison. And that goes as far as even the identity that a person who is in prison receives upon leaving. So for example, the felon label that one person receives once they leave. So if you're a convicted felon and you finish your time in prison, you come out, but what opportunities are you really left with, right? First of all, you have the label of being a felon. So if you are in the hopes of finding a job, you still have that label that's working against you. You're denied public housing. So opportunities where, you know, people who are homeless who would want to find shelter somewhere, you're denied that because you have that label attached to your name. And opportunities, therefore, like, how are you supposed to, like, if you really had the intention and the motivation to start over, how would you go about doing that when you don't even have the basic necessities that you need to survive? So what ends up happening, touching upon what Jason was saying, was recidivism, right? So for example, if you are put into jail under, a drug offense or for possessing or selling drugs, if you're taken or stripped away from all the opportunities that you have to move past that, what other way would you want, like what other means or agency would you have to move past that, to start over, other than falling back into what you were doing before, because that was able to provide for you before. So what ends up happening is, because basically all other avenues of escape from prison are cut off for you, a lot of people who do leave are almost forced into cycling back into what they were doing before. So what ends up happening is you have this cycle, this loop that keeps happening. Even once you're taken out, you're put back in. And the title of this workshop is The New Jim Crow. So the Jim Crow laws were the laws that were catered around slavery, right? So they're regarding slaves at during the 1800s, 1900s. And what you can imagine is, although we don't have slavery existing now, although we don't have the physical workforce that are slaves, we do have a new labor force that, although we can't outwardly call them slaves, they're working in the same measures and the same means, right? So even in prison, you have the workers who are actually forced to make different goods. So for example, there's different industries that are available now where you can buy goods that are made by people in prison. And they're being paid 19 cents an hour for that, which is way below minimum wage, obviously. And you can imagine a lot of actually the furniture here at UCLA is made by people in prison. So even our institutions now are by buying goods or furniture from a facility that makes goods that are made in prison. It's only perpetuating the cycle even further, right? So that's another investment into the system in and of itself. So and also the prisoners or the inmates, they don't have a choice of whether they can work or they can't work. They have to work. If they choose to not work, they have to, they believe that they're put in solitary confinement, so they have to work. 90 cents an hour, 4 hours per day. So there's no real escape. So basically, what I'm trying to say is the prison force the inmates that are working in prison now have become the new labor force that's there to replace what slaves were a couple of centuries ago. And as you can see, the U.S., I believe the number was, we actually have the highest amount of inmates from any country around the world. I think it was even like combined or something. We have a crazy amount.
5% of the population of the world is the United States, but we have like
760 million. Yeah, that's
a large
insane.
percent.
So this isn't all that's happening isn't just a coincidence. It isn't just chance. There's actually different agencies or different things that are in motion that are set to keep people in prison for longer periods of time for lower offenses. And I mean, there's different countries in the world that don't even incarcerate their population for drug offenses. Yet here we are with 716 per 100,000 who are incarcerated. It's insane.
You want to?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so this is just something to talk. So we talked about like the new Jim Crow and the idea that we're like we're finding ways to put people into prisons. So one way that happened now, and this was between like the Reagan and the Clinton era, so like 80s to 93 or 93, whatever it was Clinton. Okay, so we began the war on drugs, and the war on drugs established a new cabinet position, which is the drug czar. You guys know who the drug czar? As if they've been in Bush's administration. I remember sounds like when I first became cognizant of the world was the Bush administration. So this started before the Bush administration. This was the Reagan era. And what they did is they sent in, so there's a lot of drugs coming out from Mexico, Central America, South America. So what they did is they penalized drugs differently. So they considered some to be worse than others. So they created this 100-to-1 sentencing program. So basically, crack was 100 times worse than cocaine, is what they came up with, right? But crack is essentially like
It's a
version
cheaper
of
form of
cocaine.
cocaine, right?
It's
Kind
a
of
less
like
pure.
exactly. So crack was considered a drug of choice for people in more urban communities. You know, people of color usually chose crack, and then cocaine was usually like a white man's drug.
Much cheaper to use crack, much more expensive to use cocaine. So actually, the sentencing for 5 grams of crack, which 5 grams is not a lot of anything, was the same as 500 grams of cocaine, which if you could never do 500 grams of cocaine. But
Or you could. But
obviously, if you have 500 grams of cocaine, you
Yeah.
have an intent to sell, right? You're not going to use 500 grams of cocaine for yourself. So this is a huge disparity in what we're charging for different types of drugs, and specifically the types of drugs that different minorities or different demographics are using. Specifically, like it really points out how we're affecting different.
Yes, this was in law. That was something that was institutionalized
Yeah.
to disproportionately affect different communities. Communities of color obviously were targeted.
And another thing to consider actually is that right before this, so Reagan was the governor of California, and something that he did during this time was dismantle state mental health facilities. So there was a period, I don't know these numbers that well, but it was tens of thousands of institutionalized people for addictions and mental health disorders were put out onto the street because we shut down state clinics, and those people are put out into the streets, and obviously people who have addiction, mental health issues that are put out into the streets and become a homeless resort to what they know, which is drugs. So not only did we take away their support system, but we also increased the penalties for doing what we were trying to help them stop doing in the first place. So that's just a different aside. I just wanted to point out sort of interesting connection between Reagan dismantling that and then Reagan putting this war on drugs policy into effect, which actually the war on drugs began under Nixon. But he declared the war on drugs, but then no one really put teeth into that until later on. And this is just another figure, because we love figures, about the number of people that are in prison for things like drug versus violence. So obviously it's hard to rate different crimes, but you would consider violent crimes to be more serious, and so you would want those people to be in prison more probably. But we have vastly more people incarcerated because of drugs than we do because of violence. So it's just an interesting thing to look at. The fact that, and so recently Prop 47 was passed in California, which decreases the severity of charges for possession of less severe drugs like marijuana. So I have a video. I think we have, yeah, it's 3 or 4. So this is just, I'm not thinking. One of those videos.
Does anyone have any questions they want to?
So the basic human rights that the basic human rights that comes after the is that the same to post and now?
Good morning, John. It's Brian.
No, so for example, the students who gave our camp, most of them are minors, so they don't carry the felony.
So mine will be like 18 or
Lower than 18.
Okay.
Lower than 18.
so even though they have they still won't you won't have to check the felony box for the felony.
I don't believe.
If their records are sealed after they turn 18, typically they are.
What does that mean?
So basically, if you get charged with something before you turn, yeah, then it's a kind of like being forgiven. They seal those records and always access it. Yes.
And distinguishing between having your record expunged versus having your record sealed, like there's a difference between that because, I mean, you won't have to put felon if you have your records expunged, but like there's a difference between expunged and sealed, so it's important, and sometimes like, you know, youth don't really understand the differences because no one really explains it to them. So it's important to kind of explain those differences too, and they don't know. Because like you can kind of still see the system, whether it was, you know, expunged versus sealed.
I don't even know about that. I'm trying to get my residency or anything. So that's very
Definitely something you should look into.
Yeah.
Thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah. So just
Emailed me and was like, hey, Hank, if you could do a high-quality animated video on any issue in the world, what would you choose? Now, that was a hard choice, but I went with Incarceration in America because it is messed up. Now, crime is also messed up. Bad things happen to good people, and that's terrible, and something should be done about it. But we send people to prison to be punished, and to prevent them from doing bad things again, and to deter others from breaking the law: punishment, corrections, and deterrence. Now, we have this habit of thinking of prisoners as something very external to society. After all, there are literal walls between them and society, walls capped with razor wire and watched over by people with guns. But millions of prisoners are released each year. Today's prisoners are tomorrow's neighbors, so corrections should probably be the most important piece of the incarceration pie. Unfortunately, it is not. We are, however, really good at punishment. America has about 4% of the world's people and about 25% of the world's incarcerated people. We have the highest incarceration rate in the world. Over the last 30 years, that number has skyrocketed, increasing over 400%. 41% of American juveniles and young adults have been arrested by the time they turn 23. Children as young as 13 years old have been sentenced to die in prison. And our prisons violate international standards. Solitary confinement increases instability and violence in inmates and is considered by international law to be torture. But in America, it's not regulated by anyone except the prison officials. No judge, no jury. Arguably the most devastating form of punishment we enact in this country, and yet there is no appeals process. And you think it's hard to get a job in America? Well, we make it intentionally more difficult to get a job once you have a conviction on your record, not to mention just live your life. Convicts are ineligible for welfare, student loans, public housing, food stamps, and are often socially disconnected from community and family support structures. So in addition to having high recidivism rates, they have very high rates of homelessness and suicide. Somewhere along the way, we started to think that being tough on crime meant being tough on criminals, but that's not the same thing. Punishment is only one piece of a much larger crime reduction pie. And it's an expensive one, with some institutions paying more than $100,000 per year per prisoner. Long prison sentences have helped to decrease crime, but no more than 25% of the decrease we've seen can be attributed to incarceration, and it costs far beyond just dollars. The cost is to people, to our country, to communities, to families, and to ourselves. The policy seems to be, if you committed a felony, we just give up on you. These wars on crime, wars on drugs, they are wars on people. The smart political move is to appear tough on crime because crime is scary. So we increased minimum sentences, we arrested more people, we sent more of them to prison. That's how we looked tough on crime. But the results are in its bad policy. It's cruel, it's short-sighted, and to continue this policy of mass incarceration would be foolish. We're living inside of a massive $75 billion per year failed experiment. 2010 was the first year in nearly 40 years that the number of incarcerated individuals in America did not increase. Policymakers are beginning to realize the magnitude of this failure, but there is a long way to go. John, I'll see you on Tuesday.
Is this Crash Course? Or is it part of like Crash Course?
But I don't know what that is, but I thought
Okay.
it was Vlog Brothers. I thought it was a great, like, really well put together.
Yeah.
Um,
It's a mass incarceration in the United States.
yeah,
Oh, okay, never mind. The guy who runs Crash Course also does Vlog Brothers. And it's like the guy who wrote like Fault in Our Stars or whatever.
oh yeah, John.
Him and his brother.
Great resource. Okay. So. In the spirit of this conference, I tried to look a bit to the intersectionality between immigration to the United States and the prison industrial complex and incarceration. The amount of time that I spent on it, this is sort of what I came up with. And obviously places like Texas and California are great examples of how this affects us because there's an ability to come into the United States via like different channels. And so 400,000 immigrants are held at any given time in the United States. And 90% of the prosecutions in Texas in 2013 were for reasons related to immigration. So the interesting thing the thing that I saw when I was researching this that was interesting was that actually last July, the cities within Texas asked private contractors to build detention facilities to deal with incarcerated immigrants because they can handle it within their own jail or prison system. And I found that to be a bit terrifying because, like we discussed before, there's very little regulation and accountability in these privatized prisons, and so we're putting people, and just like when we were talking about students that didn't have any legal representation when they went through the court system, you can imagine that probably a lot of people going through this system also aren't getting a lot of representation, and they probably aren't familiar with the United States legal system. And so I just wanted to include this for the sake of completeness of this presentation today, and I see this as a huge disparity. And I kind of do it. So I don't know if any of you have any comments on that. If not, I just want to wrap it up there.
Yeah, well, just to point back to how many immigrants are detained, that's a quota that's set. So they have to have that many prisoners at any given time at any of these detention centers. And also a lot of these detention centers obviously violate a lot of human rights of these immigrants. So a lot of the things that a lot of prisoners face, immigrants face at a much increasingly worse level. So there's a lot of hunger strikes happening in a variety of detention centers because a lot of women held in these facilities are being violated sexually, harassed, and raped by the people that run these facilities. So there's a lot of human rights violations that happen at these centers, and a lot of these are run by private corporations that a lot already have like also fund private prisons in the United States. So it's a couple of things that I know about the detention, incarceration complex.
And recently, I know it's been in the news, so the United States federal government is trying to do things about rape within prisons. And they're trying to sort of create policy and work with states on their level to decrease those kinds of assaults between staff and the people that work there. And it's a huge issue between incarcerated women and LGBTIA individuals. And Texas is actually really fighting back against the federal government on these regulations because it's going to make it more expensive and more difficult to incarcerate people. But of course, what's the cost of making sure that people aren't assaulted when they're in the care, right? Because when you're incarcerated, you actually become, like, at least minors become like wards of the state. So essentially, they're like legal guardians are the state. So we're responsible for these people, and then what if we're only hurting them further? So yeah. So to wrap it up today, we. Okay, great. Yes.
For minors who, you know, go to these detention facilities and then are like, you know, finalized for deportation, you know, let's say like they come back, they believe that because they did that, like that counts as like a crime or against them and it was placed on their record, and they believe that they're not eligible for different, like, you know, for things like 400 or for DACA or these different things, and it doesn't necessarily mean that that's true.
Can you repeat what the first part of that? Sorry. No, like what makes them not eligible for that, they're saying?
So they think that it doesn't make them eligible because they have gone through the deportation process, you know, and let's say they come back to the United States, they think that, oh, well, I'm not eligible for these different policies, but that's really not true. They have to, you know, seek out lawyers and stuff like that to kind of help them because chances are they're still eligible if they haven't committed a crime. That deportation is not a crime.
Fair enough. I just wanted to make a comment. There's well, like there's a lot of prisons expanding, right? Especially like in California, for-profit prisons, and there's actually one in Bakersfield. There's going to be like a huge action this coming up Saturday, May 30th. I think it's a Mesa Verde detention center in Bakersfield, and they're doing like a chant down the walls and a series of like kind of protesting the fact that there are continuing to build these prisons, and again, it affects like the community around there and then like the other individuals that are actually being sent to those detention centers because of all the regulations or lack of regulations and stuff. If anyone's interested to go.
That's in Bakersfield.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
That's like the caravan. Or
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the shut down the walls caravan.
Yes.
I know there's this video kind of explains more of this like the undocumented like immigrant side of it. I think it's called Immigrants for Sale. I don't know if like after you want to look it up or whatever, but I think it does a good job at explaining kind of how the prison industrial complex is like feeding off of like undocumented immigrants, especially in the Southwest, you know, with you know, bills and laws that that uphold and, you know, just like feed into it, like SB 1070 in like Arizona is one of them, and then yeah, like all these copycat laws like in different states and stuff. So yeah, I think it's worthy to check out if you want to add to that. And like for anyone out there, it's called Immigrants for Sale. It's on YouTube. You can just find it.
Yeah.
To add on to that, like there's also like DAPA and DAPA, there's like enforcement policies that go into effect with these programs. So with the expansion of DAPA, there's PEP. I forget what the full acronym is, but it's essentially replacing secure communities. So these programs are like where police and ICE, so immigration enforcement, customs enforcement agencies, come under one umbrella. So police have the power to act as immigration agents. So if you're undocumented and you're arrested for, say, driving without a license, you're fingerprinted, you're put into a system that is then referred to ICE, who can then, the police can hold you until ICE picks you up. So there is a collaboration between local police agencies and national federal immigration agencies. And so that's something that we're trying to fight, especially here in LA. It's called ICE out of LA, because we still have that collaboration between ICE and police agencies. It's also state nationwide.
ICE out of LA.
Yeah, it's an organization that's trying to fight that.
Also, I just want to put it out there for anyone who's looking to get their record expunged or whatever. I know there's something in like my community. It's a little bit far from here. It's honestly like, it's in the desert. What I expect you know where it is. It's Lancaster, Antelope Valley, Palmdale, that area. But yeah, we there's this organization hosting like workshops and stuff. So please talk to me if you need that. Because again, like they've highlighted, it contributes a lot to recidivism. You know, just like when you are like under 18 and just like trying to get by. So yeah.
What was your name?
Please do that. Mara?
Mara.
Yeah, Mara.
Well, the last thing that I'll offer is like if you guys ever, some of you I guess know here, which is cool. But if you don't, or you're interested in coming here, you have questions about it, you can email either like myself or the IYTP email. We're always happy to respond to things.
Oh, just another thing. Actually, last year we just passed a resolution. IYEC, the student government, passed a resolution to actually divest from the prison industrial complex. So UCLA, as of last year, is not going to be donating, or there's no profits are going to be put toward companies that are invested in the prison industrial complex.
So like Starbucks, McDonald's, and everything.
Mm-hmm.
It's sort of like a ceremonial thing because it's actually us suggesting to the greater UC to do that. So they all UCs have to do that, but it's, we did that for apartheid in South Africa, so divest from apartheid, and actually Nelson Mandela himself said that UCLA is doing that as a large part of
The movement.
the movement. So yeah, we think it's pretty cool. So,
Sorry,
yeah.
last thing. If you guys don't have access to going, I'm sorry, what did you say? You're from? Lancaster. Youth Justice Coalition is in South Central, or in South America. And they also do extensions, and they have information on all of those. So you're not like up there, you're down in the southern part of LA. Youth Justice Coalition do a lot of that work.
I think that's our time, right?
Also, if you guys can go through your folders and just fill out the eval